small crowd today. I put some things on the agenda. I wanted to share the feedback we got at the working group leads meeting from the TOC members on the proposed roadmap for 1.8. Everything seemed to pass without comment, except for the critical but uncommitted work, which was dealing with metadata for inbound and outbound calls that don't belong to the mesh. So coming from proxyless places or going to proxyless places, and also about metrics expiry. The feedback we got was that both of them should have some work done. And so for the metadata, the feedback was that we should pursue endpoint annotation for outbound calls. So this is something we had talked about, I think, on the Slack channel, maybe some other forums, but quickly using the existing endpoint annotation to add some labels with metadata about the endpoints and send them. And if we could do it efficiently by doing it for endpoints that we know don't have proxies, I guess, was the optimization proposed. But that sounds like some work that we should pursue. And then for metrics expiry, they asked that we prioritize documenting the workarounds and developing the plans for how we're going to address that work in 1.9 and beyond. So that was the major feedback from the Naresh. Was there anything else that you recall?
No, I think Doug, that's good. I was going to just ask, are these reflected in the updated extensions roadmap, the changes that you just mentioned?
I put notes there. I think I need to take another pass to make it more official. So I put document workarounds, develop plan, but yeah, probably should clean that up.
Yeah, and I think for the P0s that we are, in the TOC, after the TOC feedback that we are saying that we are planning to do, we should probably move it from uncommitted work, and if there are no names, we'll find names somehow.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. So and you move those into the top priority section.
Yes. Yes. For the metadata support for outbound, I'll take a look at the code today. Well, I shouldn't say today. I'll take a look at the code this week.
Okay.
And if it's straightforward, I'll collaborate with you on Slack.
Okay. Yeah, I had looked at it a little bit and then got completely sidetracked. So I think it's pretty straightforward, but
I think so too.
Yeah.
I'll let you know. Are you gonna be working on that? Is that fair to assume?
I am happy to work on it. I think that's the safest thing I can say. So I will try and find time to work on it. Yes. Is there anything else we wanted to say about that, or? The other thing that came up afterwards was Sven pointed out that we didn't have anything on our roadmap for multi-cluster. So I added a line item here to say we should add multi-cluster support to the dashboards, but I think there's probably more work there. I just don't have a good idea of what that work is per se, because we sort of documented how you monitor in multi-cluster scenarios, and the metrics themselves should already do the right thing. So I think that there's a need to focus on multi-cluster support, but I don't know what specifically that work is. So if anyone out there is looking at this or thinking about it or wants to own that, that would be great. I don't have a lot of guidance to provide in that regard, however. Let me add that.
So, Doug, two things. Yep. First is, if we are unclear on what it means, I would suggest not to add it until Sven helps you get clarity on it, because we have items on the roadmap which never gets done because we don't know what it is. Second is, what's the state of telemetry in multi-cluster right now? I know there is a cluster label that can be optionally added in all the metrics. Is that the extent of it, or does it go beyond it?
So there's that label. The labels that get added for Prometheus metrics. Those get auto-added. And then there is a document I think Carolyn put together on the website about how to monitor across clusters. And so those are the two things that have been done for multi-cluster as far as telemetry goes. So it's
When
sort
you
of bare.
say monitor across clusters, is it like looking at Kiali or something? Or I'm just curious what that is.
It's how to set up Prometheus so that it's scraping and aggregating data across all the different clusters.
I see.
So that's basically the extent to which that I'm aware of any work to support multi-cluster has gone on. So Sven was asking if there's more that we need to be doing, if we should be documenting it. And that's why the only thing I added was the dashboard, because at least there I can see having a drop down and say, only show me traffic going to or from this cluster. But I think that there's probably more that we could do. But you're right, I don't have a good handle on what that is.
Okay, no, that information is helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. So that was sort of it for the roadmap. So yes, I have an action item to go back and clean it up with some of that feedback. Is there anything that anyone wants to talk about regarding the roadmap before moving on, other than that?
I was just going to say, Neeraj, on the Kiali side for multi-cluster, we put a little bit of, I mean, the support is very minimal. We've tried to clean up a little bit of being able to connect requests that are either going out of one cluster or coming into another cluster, but there's nothing that actually will show you that as one edge, you know, going from one cluster to another. We're actively looking at multi-cluster and better support for that too going forward, but it's a work in progress as well for us because it's getting defined better now for Istio, so now we're going to be doing the same.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey Jay, one of the things about multi-cluster support is that those labels are sort of dynamically, right? So they sort of detect when the cluster, you know, when you're doing the install, that it's a multi-cluster scenario and then adds the labels. And we had talked about maybe turning those into always on. Would that make it easier for Kiali to adopt some features, the ability to rely on those labels always being there?
I mean, that's a good question. And my gut feeling is always on may be better, just because if we're starting to use cluster identifiers to be able to figure out where to find definitions and things like that, you know, where to query, it seems to me like always on will be better.
Okay.
But it's really just a gut feel at this point.
Okay.
Doug, if we do go this route, as long as there is an option to turn it off for people who don't need multi-cluster, I don't think there's much loss there. So you can turn it on. Like folks like us, for our customers, we might turn it off. Because like Jay was saying, I think trying to visualize multi-cluster is a much bigger story than metrics.
Sure. And I think with the customization work that's in, it should be straightforward to turn off, but documenting that I think would be the big thing. Okay. Well, that would require an RFC anyways, but so maybe I'll add that to the roadmap. Okay. Anything else that anyone is thinking about 1.8 before we move on? Okay, on the Slack channel, there was this issue about response codes, in particular when downstream connection failures happen. And so we were returning 0, and the question came up as to whether or not that was appropriate. And so I think I said on the Slack channel, I would raise this in the working group. So I just wanted to sort of open the floor to hear thoughts on what should we do when there are no response codes? Should we make it something else? Is 0 okay? There seemed to be sort of a split thinking, at least on the Slack channel. So I just wanted to see what the thoughts were here.
Yeah, so I started that discussion on Slack, and then you pointed out that it's really been a discussion that's goes back to another issue, I guess, that Carl Stoney, I can't remember his name, had also brought up in the past. But what happened for me was I didn't know if I was looking at a bug or not, right? Because all of a sudden there were HTTP response codes of 0, which threw us for a little bit of a loop in Kiali, because we were expecting always an HTTP response code of 2xx, 3xx, 4xx, whatever, three digits. And so I think the zeros, we're not anticipating that, but we didn't know what. I mean, we could deal with it. I mean, so the question is, what's really appropriate? And the other problem being that if we go with zeros, what do you do with GRPC, where 0 is success? So I don't have an answer. I'm looking to see what you guys think is best. Then we'll support it.
So Jay, it looks like there might be two problems here. One is we are overloading 0 here, where 0 might mean different things depending on different contexts. And then the second problem is, what's the right metric, I guess, to emit when you get errors where a response is not even emitted? Are we trying to solve both of them or just one of them?
I guess it's really both. I mean, in this case, right? So you get the response flags, which are telling you that there was a downstream connection problem, and so there's really no response, right? So if there's no response, can you even? I guess there really shouldn't be a response code. I guess it would seem logical that way. I don't know if that makes it easier or not, but it seems logical. It's still an error. The request fails. So in general, when we're trying to show that, say in a graph or wherever else, it's a traffic failure. Usually we feel like there should be a response code that goes with that. So I don't know what's best.
Yeah,
I really don't.
And Doug, is the unset value of response code 0 or undefined? I'm guessing it's 0. That's why this is happening.
Yeah, it's 0. It's initialized somewhere to 0. I think it's overridden when there's an actual response code.
So is making it like undefined make it more clear? And is that a thing we can do for integer?
Right. We'd have to figure out what the right thing to do there is.
Yeah.
Certainly when it gets translated into the metric, we could change it to like a dash or something, right? But it had been 0. There's less of a concern at the moment with overlap with gRPC, if only because we have the separate gRPC response status field. So we for gRPC success, we should see 200 and then a 0 in the gRPC response. But yeah, having 0 in the HTTP is just because that's what the integer gets initialized to, and then when it gets converted over, it just stays a 0 because it wasn't updated.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the other thing you can do, as like we were just talking about, keep another value as an uninitialized state other than 0 if 0 is confusing. But I mean, keeping like a dash or undefined, will it really make it better though?
It doesn't really necessarily make it better. I mean, so the question is then, how do you, if the right thing is to not have a response code, to not have a proper HTTP response code, then you have to at least be able to know that the request, something has to be the flag that says this, this failed to launch or whatever. We never got a response because of a timeout or whatever else. So is that by, how do you determine that? Do you determine it by looking at the response code, or do you determine it by looking at the flags, or what?
I think currently it has to be a combination of both, right? Or as far as I know, because there might be in case, well, let's see. So maybe some telemetry expert can tell me. So if you do proceed and you can get a response code, but the request still terminates, what happens then, Doug? Do you get an actual response code with a response flag?
So you get a partial response? I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah.
I think that you would get the. Well, I don't actually know. I imagine that you get the response code. I don't know about the response flag. Maybe Kuwat, do you know? Or Nooper or anyone on the call?
I don't know, but I'd like to say that I like having 0 for the response code. Curl does the same thing if it gets a timeout.
I think if you get a response, there should be a response code for sure, or even a partial response.
Okay, so if that's the case, then in case of errors, then they can be an error even though you have a response code. So you need to look at both.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's no real way around looking at both, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I do agree with Ed what he was saying around having one indication. If we can make it uniform is better, but I just don't think it is possible, because if you set the response code to something else other than what the server sent, then you are kind of masking the real behavior. Right? So I don't know. It feels like we are doing the right thing in both the cases, unless you all think that we have to consolidate this and have yet another flag which always says that this is the error.
I think it's probably correct, like, to just have the 0 HTTP response code. There was also some talk of only reporting it at, like, in TCP metrics, but I think if it's an HTTP or gRPC request, that if the response code is 0, you should probably be able to assume that there was no response. And so if you have a 0 response code, for a gRPC protocol, you can ignore the gRPC response code, I would say. Does that sound right?
So you're saying if it's gRPC and we don't have a response code, don't even bother to look at the gRPC response status?
I guess, because what would it be? Zero,
Yeah,
is,
I don't know.
0 is success for gRPC. So you'd have to base it off of the. I thought I heard you say, Doug, that the HTTP response code would be 200.
Yeah.
In the case of a success. So if we can always assume that response code 0 means there was no response, then at least that's something consistent.
I feel like that is a safe assumption, that if the HTTP response code is 0, that we didn't get a response.
And that is the current behavior, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's just a matter of, for the consumer side, for Kiali or anyone else, just to be able to understand that when we query the metrics, that we have to assume that a 0 is something that we have to handle. Because I can tell you right now, we actually do some things with, regex and so forth, where we're looking for 3-digit response code, which is a problem right now.
Okay, I think for sure the action coming out of all this is we need better documentation about the possibility of response code being 0, and making that clear, and sort of providing information about what that means. At the very least.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, it would be good to have it documented somewhere just so that we can at least record that the decision's been made and it's on purpose.
Right. Okay.
All right, I'll follow up on the Kiali side to add support.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
So Doug, you mentioned that there's a gRPC status or gRPC response code label now. Is it by default turned on or off? Because I can't find it in 1.7 documentation anywhere.
It should be on all the time. I think it's gRPC response status, and I think it's probably defaults the same way as the response code. But I thought it was on all the time. Maybe it's only on for gRPC calls, although I don't know that's the case.
I can find it out. I was just curious if you knew off the top of your head. Thanks.
Kawad or Nupur, or anyone else that remember if it's only on? I'd like to really answer that.
Sorry, what was the question?
gRPC response status, is that label conditional or is that always on? Do you remember? I thought it was always on.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Let me look real quick while we're talking about it. Okay, so here's the interesting thing about it. gRPC response status is always on. But if the request protocol was not gRPC, we set it to the empty string, and so it will disappear, I think, from the metrics. It'll show up as an unset label and be dropped.
Oh, interesting. How did you find this out so quickly? Where is this documented?
It's documented in the code.
Okay.
In the plugin.cc file, line 172.
And your assumption looks correct. I'm just looking at the Prometheus console right now, and I just did a quick query, and it does seem to be unset on all of my requests at the moment.
And so that is something we could do, right? Is if response code is equal to 0, set it to the empty string. That would be the other. We could add logic here, right? That is doing a similar sort of check.
That would probably be good.
Is that better? I mean, then you would have no response code at all.
I mean, that makes me wonder only now whether the 0 is right or whether that should be an empty string, but that seems like it could really cause more special case code than.
Right.
The problem with things not showing up at all is that it's sometimes special case code as opposed to just being able to do a query.
Well, yeah. So should we change the gRPC logic too? I think that's another question. I think we did that intentionally to not populate stuff when it in the default case when you don't need it. I don't know what thoughts are there.
I think if the request protocol is gRPC, that it should probably be set, even if it's ignored because of the because of the other response code. So I guess I leave it.
Okay. And all of this, of course, we had talked about consolidating these down to a single field at some point. I don't know what the thoughts are there and how that would impact this conversation, right? If response code wasn't just HTTP, but was also gRPC, then I think there is overlap, and we'd have to figure out
then there's a problem.
a story.
Yeah, I think we discussed that in details when the gRPC response status was being discussed. I feel like what we have is reasonable instead of trying to consolidate.
Yeah, I would leave it at this point.
And remember, whenever we change these things, it's a churn on all the tooling that people create around these metrics.
Yep.
So if you have a good migration story, we can do it.
Okay. Is there more that we should talk about with this issue?
No, I think leaving it as is and just having the consume, if it's documented as to what happens with the downstream connection loss, would be good.
Okay. Okay, the other thing I copied up from the agenda from last time, which I can't remember if we talked about, so if we did, apologies, it's just my brain has a hole in it. I feel like a month ago or so, there were some issues coming up, or at least on one of the channels, either Slack or Discuss, about how to support MTLS to add-ons and how to do authentication and authorization for add-ons. And so I was sort of wondering if there's more that we as a working group should do to help provide guidance around setting up add-ons, or whether or not that's something we want to sort of leave as an exercise for the community, because, you know, in the same spirit of we're sort of not supporting customized installations. So John, that's why I tagged you. I was just sort of curious what your thoughts were, and I'm also interested in others.
Seems like yes, we should provide some guidance probably, because I think if we ask users to do this, they'll just end up getting stuck and asking us on Slack or GitHub or whatever. Because, you know, I don't think it's obvious. I think there's a lot of different ways you can do it as well. So right now, I don't even know exactly what we'd want to do. And I think it's different for different add-ons. Like Prometheus is certainly different than like Jaeger, for example. So it would probably be useful.
Okay. Ed, do you think this is something that we could work on across working groups as sort of a user experience issue, or do you think this belongs in some other form, or maybe shared between user experience environments and telemetry, or like what's the right way to drive this work?
So Mitch really wants to make a bunch of debug APIs for add-ons. I would ask him what he thinks that is. I have not been following add-on stuff.
Okay, I'll follow up with Mitch then, and maybe start throwing together an RFC related to what we want to do in terms of documentation.
Yeah, I find it hard to tell what the settings are for like MTLS and certificates and stuff. So it would be good to get UX involved with this, but I'm not sure how for 1.8. This may be a 1.9 time frame.
Yeah, this is sort of a lower priority, and I think we're, at least the telemetry side, we're already sort of overbooked for 1.8. So yeah, it's probably 1.9 time frame. This is right to me too. Okay. Okay, that's really all I had on the agenda, based on things I remembered coming up on the channels. Is there anything else that anyone wants to talk about or bring up or ask questions about or show demos off about or anything like that? Okay, well, if not, thanks everyone, and enjoy your days. Hopefully blue skies will return wherever you are at some point soon. And I'll talk to everyone later.
Thanks very much.